Hey class, in this recording we're talking about labor, the stages of labor. As we look at this birthing process, as a female is giving birth to her offspring, the stages of labor can be broken up into three phases. We have dilation, expulsion, and the placental stage. And then each of these stages tends to be longer when a woman is experiencing primipara. And primipara is just a fancy way of saying that we're looking at a first time mother. And in these situations, first-time mothers tend to have more connective tissue that hasn't been stretched out, that hasn't lost its elasticity. And because these first-time mothers tend to have a lot more connective tissue, there needs to be a lot more effort put into stretching things out to get the child out of the mother's uterus, to get the child out of the womb and into the world. For instance, and my wife has had 3 kids. For our first child, labor and delivery, the whole thing, the early pre-labor to Timothy being born was about 32 hours for the entire process. So it was a marathon. And then for our subsequent children, when my wife was categorized as multipara, this process got shorter and then shorter. So for our second child, Benjamin, when he was born, he was, it was 3 a.m. No, 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. So 5 hours. So we went from 32 hours to 5 hours for the second child. And then for the third child, woo, it went fast. I actually missed that. Everyone missed the third child, or my daughter coming out. It just happened instantaneously almost. The doctor had walked out to go to the bathroom. I had taken my 2 boys to the local playground, and then all of a sudden, there was a baby down there, and it took everyone by surprise. If a woman has given birth 5 times, so if we're looking at baby number 6, number 7, anything beyond baby number 5, that's categorized as grand multipara. And in these situations, the kids come out very quickly because the connective tissues have been previously stretched by subsequent birthing processes. So let's talk dilation stage. This is typically going to be like the pre-labor stage. Some women are actually going to be partially dilated to maybe 1 centimeter or 2 centimeters. And when we say dilated, we're talking about the cervical canal. So that external os starts to open up. And some women will be partially dilated for a couple days before even feeling labor contractions. But that's kind of an exception. Now, as we look at this dilation stage, it's typically going to take 8 to 24 hours, assuming primipara or just multipara. It ultimately needs to make it to about 10 centimeters, or as I tell people, about the width of your palm, because we need to get a kid's head through there. And just because it opens up to make room for the kid's head doesn't mean that there's really enough room for the kid's head. The child's head, think all the way back to when we talked about the skeletal system, has, let me move this diagram here. The child's head has unfused plates of the bones. There are still lots of soft spots in the skull, and that allows for the child's head to bend and flex as the child's head passes through the birth canal. So what you can see, if you look at a brand new child, a newborn, you can just look at their head and know, oh, that was a cesarean section, or versus, oh, that was a vaginal birth. Because kids that are born via vaginal birth are cone heads for about 1 to 2 days postpartum or after being birthed. And they usually have some bruising on their faces as well after getting squeezed through that birth canal. Whereas kids that are born via cesarean section, whew, they are cute looking. They are just adorable looking, and they are not cone heads for the first day or 2 of their life. So as we look at this dilation stage, not only do we have a widening of the cervical canal, we're also going to have the thinning of the cervix. This thinning of the cervix is known as effacement. And eventually, as this process is continuing, the amniotic sac, which is effectively just a bag the kid is being carried in, is going to break. And when the amniotic sac ruptures, all the saline fluid, which coincidentally is nearly identical in saline concentration to ocean water, will come pouring out, and oftentimes the woman will feel like she's peed herself because there's this flow of warm, serous liquid in between her legs. And that's the breaking of the water. After we are done with that early dilation stage, we've reached the late dilation stage. And that's typically when we get to that 10 centimeter mark. And that's going to be at about the 24 hours of labor mark. For somebody who's in primipara for the first baby, and for somebody who's in multipara, it can be fast, very fast. I can't help but think back to 3 generations ago with the greatest generation, the parents of the baby boomers. I can't imagine a woman giving birth to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 children, and how quickly that labor process would have gone for the 10th child. That's just outside of my realm of comprehension. So I remember as a student, and even as a first-time parent, I had to ask the midwife, how on earth do you know how dilated the cervix is? I mean, it's not like you can grab a ruler, like a ruler from your desk and shove it up there and measure the opening of the cervix. The ruler's never going to fit, and it's not going to happen, not going to work. And so here's how they figure out how dilated the woman's cervix is. It's done by touch. So as we look here, you would insert your fingers into the vaginal canal, and if your finger can't go into the external os, the cervix is not dilated. If you can get 2 fingers in, you have a 2 centimeter dilation. So the rule of thumb is, or the rule of index finger is that each finger that you can fit into the opening corresponds to approximately 1 centimeter. I kind of have sausages for fingers, so I would say each of my fingers corresponds to 1.5 centimeters, but you get the idea. So you calibrate the measurement based on how wide your fingers are. But then there's still the 10 centimeter mark. What do you look for the 10 centimeter mark? It's not that you shove your whole fist up there to measure. At that 10 centimeter mark, to say that the woman or the cervix has been dilated to 10 centimeters, you instead feel for the lip of the cervix. So instead of the cervix being really thick, the cervix becomes very thin as it effaces. And once it becomes just a little tiny nub on the side of the vaginal canal, that's called fully dilated to 10 centimeters. Because as we look here, it's not like you can measure the distance of this gap because there's a child's cranium in the way of that measurement. So instead, clinicians palpate the circumference to feel that little tiny lip of the cervix. And when that little tiny lip of the cervix is almost gone, nearly gone, that's when they start to tell the woman that's giving birth, hey, you're at 10 centimeters, it's time to start pushing. So now we're done with the dilation phase. We've got to 10 centimeters. Now it's time to get the kid out. And we're at the expulsion stage. And during this expulsion stage, the child's head is going to enter into the vaginal canal. And this expulsion stage, once you get to the 10 centimeter mark, it's not over yet. You've just created the opening. Now you need to get the child through the opening. And the big barrier to human childbirth, vaginal childbirth for human beings, is the size of the child's cranium. So when we think of primipara, first-time parents, they're going to spend, these mothers are going to spend 30 to 60 minutes pushing the child out for the very first time. I'll admit, my wife is a stud. And especially before we had kids, we spent, I would say, 5 hours a week aggressively working out at the local YMCA. We used to look a lot different before we had children. I definitely have a dad bod going on right now. And as we look at my wife, for her pushing, I mean, even though it was our first time kid, she was able to push him out once she was dilated in less than 10 minutes. It just, bam, he came out. But of course, she had like abs of steel at the time. And she actually pushed him out with so much force that he was airborne for a short period of time. And I remember very vividly, I was next to my wife, I was holding her left hand in my right hand, and then I was holding her left knee in my other hand. And I'm trying to encourage her, but I don't know what the heck to say. I was a clueless idiot at the time. And she just pushed down really hard, and my oldest son just came out, and he was airborne. And the midwife we had was fantastic. She Timothy's umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck, with one rotation during this birthing process, and he just flew out. And the midwife, while he was mid-flight, spun him 360 degrees along his longitudinal axis, and then caught him, so that by the time she caught him, his umbilical cord was no longer wrapped around his neck. And I was very impressed with her skills. This process of getting the kid's head out, and I know you probably don't care about the birthing story of my children, but I do, so I'm going to share them. As we look at the kid coming out, this process of the kid initially exiting the vaginal canal is called crowning. That's when you can see the first little bit of their scalp. And you can also see the labia majora become thin and start to bulge out, where there's just this large bulge within the perineum region as the child's head is being moved through the birthing canal, through the vaginal canal. And this crowning part is the single most difficult part. In particular for women, first-time parents, or first-time moms. There's still a lot of connective tissue associated with this vaginal orifice and with the labia majora, and sometimes there's a little bit of tearing. So when we think of an episiotomy, if the doctor was to do an episiotomy, usually the doctor would make a small incision right there. I just marked it in red to make the crowning process go a little bit faster. Once the child's head gets out, so we are at the at this point, we're done with crowning, and we're just going to go ahead and have expulsion. This expulsion stage goes really quick because we're done with the hard part. And usually what ends up happening is the shoulders are the next big barrier. So the child's shoulders are going to be kind of unequal. One shoulder will be hunched up higher and the other shoulder will be hunched down lower, or they're going to be both kind of squeezed forward so that they aren't as wide in diameter. And the kid comes out after the child is born. The helper, the medical practitioner, the attendant is going to take the umbilical cord and pinch off one end, and then using their fingers, they'll just squeeze the blood back into the child's circulatory system and pinch off the umbilical cord, usually with a clamp, right next to the belly button, or what will soon be the belly button. And then they cut the umbilical cord. And I've had the privilege of cutting 2 umbilical cords, and I've got to say, they're tough. There's a lot of adventitia and connective tissue associated with the umbilical cord. And even though I had a fresh pair of stainless steel scissors, I had to do multiple squeezes in order to cut that umbilical cord. It took me about 30 seconds to cut it the first time because I underestimated how tough it was. So here's that expulsion stage. You can see how the child's head, we're kind of halfway done with crowding. The face is halfway out here. And note how the shoulders are at unequal marks. So the shoulders are at an angle so that they aren't as wide, and it makes it easier for the child to get through the birthing canal. And then we also have the umbilical cord anchored to the placenta. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So after the kid comes out, we have the placental stage. And to give you an idea of the size of the placenta, just look at your hand, the palm of your hand and your fingers. That's about the size of a human placenta. But I have really big hands. So maybe if you have small hands, think just a little bit bigger than your palm and your fingers, surface area. And then right here you can see the umbilical cord. All of that white tissue on the outside is collagen-rich connective tissue. It's very tough cord. And during this placental stage, we need to get what is oftentimes referred to as the afterbirth out of the mother's uterus, out of her womb. And to do this, the placenta needs to separate from the endometrium. And as this placenta and the leftovers of the amniotic sac comes out, all of this is referred to as the afterbirth. And I remember with our first pregnancy, we were like, do we go to the hospital? Do we do an at-home birth? What do we do? We don't know. And because we have way too many degrees for our own good, we decided to read some books about it, because that's what you do. You read a book about it. And I remember reading some books about it, and everyone recommended that you have an extra bowl on hand. So You first are going to catch the child, get the child out, but then you need about a half-gallon bowl or 2-liter bowl on hand to catch the afterbirth. And there's going to be obviously some blood associated with this as well. And one of the other things that just horrified me as I was reading about this whole at-home birth process is I found cookbooks, human placenta cookbooks. And apparently some people swear by eating the placenta, their child's placenta after the birthing process. And the rationale behind this is that the placenta contains a lot of the hormones associated with pregnancy, a lot of estrogen and a lot of progesterone, and if they consume their own placenta, that they are going to reduce the hormonal crash associated with the birthing process and minimize the amount of baby blues or postpartum depression that they experience afterwards. For my wife and I, just in case you're wondering, we decided not to get the placenta cookbook, in case you were curious. So that's all we have for this recording on the birthing process. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the class discussion board or shoot me an email. And as always, happy studies.